Men, welcome back to the Manhood Tribe Show. I'm your host, Don, and I'm really glad to get to be with you again today. If you've been along for the ride for the past few weeks, or even if you're jumping in new here today on this episode, we're doing something really fun right now where we are talking to a number of guys who are leaders in men's ministry and the men's work space, just trying to be able to help reach and serve men kind of in all types of different contexts. And we're really kind of asking the question of why is it that most men's ministries are really just kind of bad? They're not places that most guys want to connect. It's not a place that guys find themselves drawn to. Most churches really struggle with being able to have a men's ministry, let alone to be able to do it well. And so we're trying to kind of explore, why is that? What's that about? And are there ways that we can think about doing that better? So I'm really excited to have on the show today our guest and a friend of mine, Matt Davis. Matt is the founder of Ministry Transitions, where he helps leaders both in ministry and in the marketplace navigate some of the hardest seasons of their lives. When their role ends, a chapter closes, and the question kind of becomes, what's next after this? He also hosts the Life After Ministry podcast, where he shares real stories of men who faced loss, change, and reinvention and have found their footing again. So this is going to be a unique angle where we get to hear about some things that affect the lives of pastors who have to transition out of ministry, and really what the role of men in the church and men's ministry can and could be as it affects the pastors around us. So Matt, really glad to have you on the show today. Welcome, man.
Good to be here, Don. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to start with, I know just in the time that you and I have been able to talk with each other, that your work with Ministry Transitions really is kind of born out of your own personal story. So I'd love to just start there, man. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what's happened in your journey that's allowed you to kind of be at this place of doing the work of Ministry Transitions?
Yeah, to make a very long story short, I was in ministry. I was serving the church. I did the normal rotation of coming in as an intern, working with children and youth, and then you stay there long enough. Eventually, you go through this life cycle of, you go from an intern to a director to maybe they'll make you a pastor one day. And so I was doing that, and then my marriage fell apart the first time, and then we survived, and they made me the marriage pastor, marriage and family.
Oh,
I
wow.
was also teaching pastor, executive pastor, and then our marriage fell apart the second time. And the second time was the hard one in that it was the force that brought me out of ministry as I knew it. And so I had a moral failure, very public, very painful season and process. And thankfully, my family survived, my marriage survived, I survived. And I'd say that there were probably moments in the last decade where I thought none of those would survive. And so I'm very thankful to be on the other side of that and getting to walk with people in very similar circumstances, trying to figure out, what do you do with the mess that you've made of your own life in many ways? And how did I get here? And how do I make sure I never go back? And so that's been a little bit of the work of what we've been doing in Ministry Transitions, is just walking people. I mean, transition in life is inevitable, right? We can't ever, we can't avoid that. And some of those are thrust upon us, and some of them we've walked right into ourselves. And so it's kind of the greatest honor and joy to redeem some of the painful parts of life and walk with people in those seasons for themselves.
Yeah. That's great, man. Thank you for your just for your candor. Even I know that's probably a hard way to start probably every podcast that you're on to be able to tell that story again. But thank you for the courage in that as well. But I'd love to hear a little bit of what did that, you kind of talked about like the work involved in that kind of transition season, not only to figure out your next steps, like job wise, like how to be able to get a job that pays the bills for your family when you're transitioning out of ministry, but also the work of just dealing with yourself and who you were as a man and what all happened there. So tell us some of that. Maybe start with the job and career stuff, and then let's do a little more of the interpersonal work.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talk about on we had a podcast, and honestly, like, even to talk about any of it is almost laughable on my side of things, because this is not like some gracious, wonderful, like, overcoming all odds story, except that it didn't feel as great as I was going through it, right? And so we
Yeah,
started,
sure.
my wife and I started a podcast called Life After Ministry, and it really was based on this idea that if your last day in vocational ministry is day 0, what do you do on day 1 to start rebuilding your life? And
Yeah.
what do you do particularly in the church world? Like, what do you do if your education is you went to seminary and you stood behind a pulpit and preached for a long time? Like, how do you make that transition from
Yeah.
ministry into the marketplace? And so figuring that out became number one, first and foremost, it was the life I was trying to live. And so that was really an ugly season. I remember working for a California state-run version of Uber. So you paid by the state, but I would pick up old folks who need to go to dialysis. I'd be picking up homeless people who needed to go to their methadone clinics.
Oh, wow.
And I can't tell you, and this was like some of this was during COVID. But like how many times like people would just soil the back seat of my car, and just
Gosh.
thinking like, "Yep, this is where I'm at in life,
Yeah.
and, how do I clean this mess up while I'm trying to clean all the other messes up?" But, uniquely, this is not just a pastor or a church thing, like, everybody has some point in their life where day 0 hits, and we have to figure out, like, what we planned and what we thought was going to happen isn't happening. And now we have to deal with the loss, the residue, the shame, the betrayal in some cases. Like, what does that look like to rebuild your life? And so we had to get very clear, very fast in a lot of different areas, but specifically career. What am I going to do to earn a living? Coaching. I need a lot of people to come alongside and just rebuild because I was living in a spot where shame was running the narrative. And then
Hmm.
counseling. And when I think about counseling, I needed counseling. My marriage needed counseling. My wife needed her own counseling. We had family counseling. Like we took counseling from absolutely every single
Yeah.
position possible. And so, thankfully, I think it's because of our openness to all of that. And there's a quote that it talks about. I think it's Maya Angelou who she says that the hardest thing is to be a novice again, and to have to start back in the beginning is very difficult. And so we had to go. What do you do when you're kind of at ground zero and you hit bottom? And what do you do from that point? So we had to get real clear on that real fast, while also just kind of recovering from a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah. No, that's good. I hear and know and imagine much more of the pain that you're having to describe there, and just what that looks like, and even just the reality of like, I need counseling, my wife needs counseling, my kids need counseling, our marriage needs counseling. It's just the multifaceted, multi-angled approach to having to deal with what's it going to look like to be able to grow out of this very difficult place of pain and transition. That's good, man. I appreciate your just your honesty and being able to paint that picture. I've heard you mention a little bit, kind of a story, your own sort of like ice tray story, as you call it. Tell us a little bit about that and what the areas of your life were that you kind of really had to face related to that story.
Uh, it was one of our counseling sessions where I had this awakening of you go into marriage specifically thinking there's this image of what that's all going to be looking like. And you think of like the Jerry Maguire story of like you complete me moment. And I even though I was warned against that, I still thought like, well, she's my everything, and she's
Yeah.
going to fulfill all of my needs. And the truth is, she didn't, and nor did I for her. And I started to see like I pictured. You remember the old school ice trays? In fact, I brought one because I have this up in my office. But you remember these?
Oh yeah. Uh huh.
Yeah, this is like
They're not that
my
old,
kids
man. I
don't.
still find them. We go to Airbnbs and they're still in the freezer. So yeah, they're not
That's
that
right.
old.
Okay. My kids don't know what this is, so
Yeah.
we had to tell them because they think that just ice just magically grows out of the
Yeah.
freezer. But
Right. Yeah. Of course.
back in the day, so I thought like, okay, when I get married, if my heart was like this ice cube tray, that Marilee, my wife, she would fill up every part of this, and that's what I put on her. And I didn't realize that expectation was very suffocating. It was very difficult for her. And so I would look at parts and containers, like segments of my life, my heart, and I'd start to see like there were places that were not getting filled up. And that began to form some bitterness and resentment in me towards her, um, because I didn't see her pouring in and filling up all of these. And so the harder part was that I saw her pouring herself out in other places. I started to
Mm-hmm.
see that in
Yeah.
her friendships and her relationships. I'm like, well, why is she doing that for them and not for
Yeah.
me?
Why
And then
not
we had
me? Yeah.
kids, right? And then like all of a sudden, like she like, they say your heart grows when you have kids. I'm thinking, well, like that means that there's gonna be even I lived out this, like, scarcity piece of it, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
finally, we had this, like, knockdown, drag out piece, and she said, "Matt, like, don't you understand? Like, don't you remember when I poured out and I was pouring here and pouring there and pouring here?" And I was like, "That's right, man." She was doing that, like, she did do that, and she did say this to me, and then she did come over and she sought me out, and she started pouring, but what I realized is she and she was the one that told me this is how I realized it, but she said, "Matt, don't you understand that, like, I'm pouring in, but it's leaking out?" And I remember the therapist saying, "Matt, like, when she does something, you've gotta, like, zip it up. You gotta seal it up because it's coming out the bottom." And we had
Mm.
this kind of picture, and this is where, like, I started to
Oh,
look,
wow. Yeah.
and this is what my heart and my life look like, and I was not only expecting her to fill all of this up, but also, like, I needed her to, like, kinda somehow, like, seal these holes in there that I had in my own life, and she said, like, "I didn't sign up for that, like,
Yeah.
that's your side of the street," and I thought, "We're married, aren't you supposed to do everything for me?" And it was so naive, but I had to learn that the hard way, and so this became my work. This became the place where I needed to focus so that number 1, when she was pouring out, that love would hold. Like
Yeah.
it wouldn't just kind of filter out the bottom, right? And that's that all, everything that goes into these holes. The holes are my woundedness. These are the places
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I've been broken and cracked and didn't get repaired. And it's just kind of been sitting there for a long time. And the other piece that we had to come to agreement on was that she was not responsible for all of it. And
Mm.
I actually realized that I needed to diversify um, how I get filled and how I get loved. And
Yeah.
if my old model of marriage was that she is responsible for filling all of this, that's not reasonable. And
Yeah.
it's not a good marriage either. That she gets one of these, maybe a little bit bigger one. She's priority, right? But she gets one of these. My kids all hold a piece of my heart. And then I started needing like this I didn't have any hobbies. Like I literally just went to work and I came home, went to work and came home, and work became like bigger and bigger. And so work all of a sudden started filling up more of this space and that became like this mistress for me.
Yeah.
And then I realized like also I didn't have great friendships. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had to spend quite a bit of time, and I still do. Like, I still need to like be cognizant of this in my life, but that I need friendships with guys, especially to be able to fill myself up. And as I'm working on kind of sealing up these holes, these wounds, and addressing those on my own, with support from my wife, but not making her do the lifting and the working and the sealing. As I start to do that work, and as I start to find some of these other channels that will also fill me up, and that's totally okay. Number one, she doesn't have to be responsible for all of that, and I'm starting to grow, and I'm becoming the kind of person that holds love, wherever it's poured out. And then I started to see like when my wife is pouring out, like it's it's a much different story today. So
Yeah.
that's been the journey, and I just keep it out in my office because I need to be reminded, like it's not. Don't make it all about her, which might
Right.
sound sacrilege, like to some people, but it's been a really helpful piece for me, a reminder.
Yeah. Uh, uh, Dude, I think that's great. I mean, what a what a fantastic metaphor and image, for I think what is probably true in a lot of guys' lives. I think the reality of um, our wives or really any of the important people in our lives pouring into us, but then the fact that we've got holes in the bottom of our ice tray and all of that love. All of that care, value, support, it just leaks out, right? Because we haven't dealt with our own stuff, the things that have shaped us, that have wounded us, that have broken us, that have contributed to the ways that we're not living well, and that we as men, haven't really faced, haven't really taken care of.
Yeah.
That's so important, and don't have the people around us to even be able to do that if we wanted to, right? Like, where are we going to do that? That kind of context is really so important. So I appreciate all of that. So I wanted to say, like, kind of keep that thread going a little bit because I'm curious, and you've started, by naming a bunch of it. But in this transition season, like, just as a man, what did this reveal to you about some of those things? Like, what some of those holes were, or why they were there in the first place? What did you learn about yourself as you kind of went through this process?
I saw my own isolation. I saw that, and the weirdness of that is that I was also standing in front of thousands of people, at church on Sundays, and so
Yeah.
you almost become the story you start to tell yourself is, I'm not lonely, I'm not isolated. Look at all of this. Like everybody, I go into Trader Joe's or go to a restaurant and I'm known, but
Right.
I'm not known.
Yeah.
And so that piece really started to get to me. The other piece for me was the unraveling of uh, my heart in some ways, not necessarily understanding like what was going on internally.
Yeah.
And I I'm sure you talk about this quite a bit in the community, but being a guy, I've found, and I've done a lot of like couples coaching and counseling, not just for myself, but when one of the advantages is you learn a little bit along the way. You get to help other people in
Uh-huh.
that space. But I continue to see lots of guys that are, and I understand when I say this that it's gonna set somebody off, but the idea that we're just not in touch with what we feel. We're unaware of what's happening on the inside. The way that probably most of us hear it is like we're not in touch with our emotions or our emotional side, and so some guys are like, whatever. But I realized like so one of our like when we call it 1.0 when our marriage fell apart the first time, we got away and did a 6 week sabbatical at a place that when we were told about it, I pictured it was like an insane asylum where everybody wore hospital gowns and you could see their butts.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so interesting because they said, we're going to look at your life like a house and we're going to have pastoral counseling from this window. We're going to have marriage counseling. And then we had like a guys group and my wife went to a women's group. And I thought the most interesting thing that happened was, and by the way, this process and season saved our marriage the first time, but I was in the guys group and you show up and there's eight guys in the room and we sat in a circle. And the funny thing is when you get eight guys sitting in a circle, the one place we all look is down.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of eye
Yeah.
contact, right?
Super
And
awkward,
we
right?
get it's super awkward. We get a lot of space. It's almost like, going to the urinals or something like that. We
Yeah.
need some space. Um, but on the floor was this big circular thing called a feeling wheel. Have you seen the feeling wheel where like it looks like a
The different
pie, but it has all
colors.
these different colors and
Yeah.
all the
Uh-huh.
different emotions. And it starts out in the very center with like sad, mad,
Uh-huh. The
glad. Like
basics.
it's all
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
it's the basics. And the facilitator would just say something like, "So where are you guys at today?" And the great thing was everybody's looking at the floor already, so we at least had this feeling wheel, and we had to like pick one, two, or three where we're at. And I realized like I have no clue. I have zero clue
Yeah.
on where I'm at. Like, what is a feeling? I have feelings. I just don't know. Like, I don't have words for these
Yeah.
things.
Don't know how to
And I
name them.
grew up.
Yeah.
I wasn't like tied to a post and beat when I was a kid. I grew up in a good home, but we just didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had this feeling like I grew up with this like the box of 8 crayons, and so I could like speak in terms of like red, green, and blue. But
Yeah.
then there's like other people, like when it came to their emotions, they had like chartreuse right? And like all these like crazy like burnt sienna. I'm like, what
Yeah.
is that? And the thing is, I think sometimes we think as guys, I'm a dude, like I don't have all that. But you're actually like, I believe that God programmed us with all of them. Like I thought I had the 8-pack or maybe even like the restaurant like kitty 3-pack or 4-pack,
Mhm.
and everybody else had like the 64-pack. And the truth is we were programmed with all of it.
Yeah.
And some of it's just been out of touch. And so that process of sitting around that circle with 8 guys looking at the ground started to open me up. And it started to help bring words to articulate what was going on in my heart in places where I couldn't. And realizing that that gap prevented me from closer relationship, from intimacy with friends, from my wife, like all of these different areas. And I had to start to learn how to articulate what was going on. And it
Yeah.
felt so freeing actually, because those things were already going on. I just couldn't, I just don't, I would just eat or I would just drink
Yeah.
because it didn't ask me how I was feeling. Like I knew what I could do with that. And so it was in the context of sitting with those dudes around a circle, looking at the ground, where I started to learn the language of my heart.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. Yeah. I think that's so important. And guys, if you're listening and can't relate, don't know what the emotion wheel is that we're talking about, like I'd encourage you to search for it. It's not hard to find on the internet. There's lots of different versions of it, but it's so helpful. And I think it's helpful because I think, Matt, your story is probably emblematic of a lot of guys where it's like uh, most guys are taught, maybe not so much intentionally, but taught by osmosis. We basically have two emotions, right? We're either angry or we're horny. It's basically it, and any emotion essentially kind of comes down to that. And so we attempt to solve all of our problems with aggression or sex. And that doesn't actually cut it. That's not a deep enough range for actually dealing with how life is. But we cover over most of our emotional experiences with some of those kinds of basic emotions and miss out on what is actually going on there, what God might be doing in our lives, and how we could better relate to each other. All that's possible, but we're not paying close enough attention and pretending that we're okay or that it's simple to deal with, and sometimes it isn't. So I appreciate your perspective there, because I think I think you're every man in the way that you're kind of telling your story there. So guys, pay attention. This is something for all of us to kind of learn from in terms of the way that we handle our emotions. I want to go back to something else that you kind of talked about, though, just in terms of relating a little bit of your experience of being a pastor, being the guy on stage, knowing lots of people, being known, but not actually being known, just kind of the way that you put it. And I just want to say to the guys listening, some of you guys that are listening are pastors or are in some kind of ministry leadership. And as Matt is talking, I've been in that place myself. Like, you relate. I know you relate. Like, I know that connects. You can identify with that experience wholeheartedly. But for the other guys listening who, maybe you're just an average churchgoer, you might not be a churchgoer at all. But your vision or understanding of your pastors or your people in ministry leadership or church leadership probably looks something like imagining that guy has all the friends in his life he could ever possibly want. He knows everybody. Like, everybody knows him. He's the best connected guy there is. There's no way in the world that guy could be lonely. And more often than not, the loneliest guy at your church is the guy at the top. It's the pastor, the guy who's on the stage. And it's not just a pastor, but any of the pastors who are regularly in front of a crowd, who are well known by the people around them, but aren't actually fully known by hardly anybody. And so I want to try to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's probably a shock to most guys. I think it actually has some things to do with our conversation about men's ministries and why they tend to be so bad in the first place. One of the things I want to ask you about, I just had a conversation, and I don't know exactly when these episodes are going to air, so whose conversation is going to come out first, but I had a conversation with a guy named Kent Evans, who leads a ministry called Manhood Journey. And one of the things that he talked about in terms of why we were kind of talking about the fact that less than 10% of churches in America have an active men's ministry. And we're just kind of talking about, like, why is that? Why do so few churches have those? And Kent said one of the reasons is pastors, who for the most part are male, can sign off on a women's ministry fairly easily because it doesn't require anything of them, right? They don't have to show up to the women's events. They don't have to participate in the women's discussions. There's a little bit of like leadership oversight involved, but by and large, there's no commitment on the pastor's part for having to do that. But for a pastor to sign off on a men's ministry creates a weird tension of, he's a dude. Is he going to be involved in that? Is he going to be expected to show up to those things? What if he doesn't like the things that they're doing? What kind of tension does that create for him? So what we see by and large is that most pastors, even if there is a men's ministry at their church, most pastors are not involved and don't show up to their men's ministry events. And so I want you to just kind of speak to that, whether or not that's exactly the story that you hear from pastors that you work with or not. I want you to just kind of speak to that dynamic. Like, what's going on there with pastors as it relates to connecting with the men in their churches and why they, for the most part, don't do that well?
I would say it's probably never been harder to be a pastor. The ask is probably bigger and deeper and further than what their expectation was to begin with. And I was just leading an event last week, and the pastor of the church showed up, and I thought, man, I was honored. I was thankful for it, but I just went to him afterwards. And I just said, I know you have a lot of asks. I know you have a lot of demands, and everything is an exception, and everything is this is the most important thing. Or if our kind of sub ministry in the church is going to survive, we have to have the pastor show up, and so that gets hard. And then you ask him to be put into a place of vulnerability, and there's a sense that I'm not safe, I'm not secure in my position. More pastors than you think are thinking that. They don't know. And unfortunately, I'm sitting in the underbelly, and I get to see a lot more of the trouble that is happening in the church. A blindsided termination where walks into a normal elder board meeting and walks out not having a job anymore, right? And so how do you do that? And then it's not just that I'm struggling and like, how do I help? But you to be vulnerable with a bunch of other dudes could cost your position, right? So where do you get safe if you're a pastor? Where do you? The assumption is that we're all sinners, but we have a little less tolerance for our pastors being sinners. And so where can they go and be real and be honest? I think the number one most confessed sin for pastors is pride, because it's pretty close to about the only one that you can say and not lose your job. I really struggle with pride, but right. But you can't say I'm struggling with pornography and still keep your job. You can't struggle with there's just so many different places where it feels like it's a minefield. So the safety of getting into a place where you're going to be, mano a mano with a bunch of dudes in your church. I think most pastors would rather sign up for the men's ministry at another church in another state. And so that's what's at stake. If and when your pastor shows up. If they do show up, it means they want to, they care, but they're also going to be very guarded in terms of what gets revealed. And so that's what we're up against.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, then, for pastors, for anybody who's in some kind of ministry or Christian leadership, one of the things I've heard you mention is just this idea that you've got to choose. I'm gonna butcher the quote from you, but you got to choose voluntary discomfort, or involuntary discomfort will choose you. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to us about that, especially as it relates to pastors.
I joined a community that my friends started, and it's called Men and Women of Discomfort. And I mean, like, I'm sure it's an amazing community, but gosh, what an intimidating name to sign up for, right? I know. When I told my wife, I said, "Hey, my friend Dane's starting this thing. I think I want to join." And who would say I'm going to sign up for,
Yeah.
discomfort. But the whole premise is built on this idea. What if we chose voluntary discomfort? I'm going to choose to put myself in a hard place,
Hmm.
so I can do the thing. I can grow the strength in the midst of that before I have a situation where involuntary discomfort has already been chosen for me.
Yeah.
And what does it look like to be involved in a community where, and sometimes it's as simple as you take the stairs or the further parking spot. Sometimes it's the uncomfortable conversation I'm going to lean into and choose, right? It's getting up early in the morning and getting the workout in. It's choosing to, go for the vegetables instead of the dessert, or choosing not to drink when you really want the second one, right? It's all of these
Right.
different pieces.
Right.
Um, so what does that look like? And so oftentimes though, I think that any time that we actually can step into the hard thing, I think we'll see fruit on the other side. And the funny piece is that the mascot for men and women of discomfort is a buffalo. And it's based on this idea that the buffalo, I don't know if you've heard this, but buffaloes are unique in nature. The difference between a cow and a buffalo is that when a storm comes, cows will run away from the storm and buffaloes will charge into it,
Okay. Yeah. I've
because
heard that. Yep.
buffaloes, they inherently know that if you charge into the storm, you'll get to the other side
Get out
faster,
of it
that
quicker.
some
Yep.
of the best vegetation is stirred up in the storm. And if you're the kind of person that charges into the storm, then you become the kind of person who's not afraid to run into those hard things. And so
Mm.
um, it's a crazy community to be involved in. And at the same time, it's served me in lots of different ways. And so the challenge is, what does it look like to step into some of these things that are a bit uncomfortable for us? And so for guys, it might be starting a tribe and sitting around with a group of dudes looking at the floor and talking about where we're at, and getting honest about it. Or having that conversation. One of my challenges in one of these seasons for men and women of discomfort was I needed to make sure that I did not perpetuate something that was in my own kind of lineage, and I wanted to make sure that my boys, especially, my boys are 18 and 20. Um, I wanted to make sure that they knew I loved them, not just because of acts of, I'd put a roof over their head and buy them things, but I wanted them to hear it from me. And so
Yeah.
my challenge for a quarter was to make sure I said I love you, and I would hug them. And there's nothing more uncomfortable than to make somebody else uncomfortable. So I just told them, I said, "Look, guys, I'm giving myself a challenge, and partly it's because I don't feel like I do a very good job of verbalizing this to you, and I want to make sure that you know. And so I'm just gonna let you know every single day, I'm gonna tell you I love you, and I'm gonna hug you for at least 5 seconds.
Mm.
And whether you feel comfortable or uncomfortable is not sorry, but I need to do this." And I found that by the end of it, our relationship changed. It was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I was getting closer to like the end of a day, like one of them would remind me, "Dad, I didn't get my hug yet today." And so it's become a
Hmm.
thing. And now it's easy.
Yeah.
I can hug my boys. And so it's been that discipline has been really good. And so that's the encouragement, is to step into your discomfort and find the thing. If it's hard for you, then it might be the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. I love this, and especially this is part of what we do as tribes, guys. If you're listening, if you're not yet a part of a tribe, I just want you to know, like, this is the kind of environment that we try to set up for men, and we have specific ways of being able to do that to help you kind of ease into that, learn what that looks like. If you've listened to our podcast at all, you've heard me talk about the idea of getting naked, how important it is to be able to strip down and deal with some of these vulnerabilities in the context of other men that you care about and that care about you. There's just no other way to be able to handle some of these things. But I want to ask you, Matt, because I think this is really, this is kind of pertinent to both your journey, and especially to guys in ministry leadership. How does okay, this is a two-sided coin, so I'll let you answer both sides of it in whatever order you want to. How does a pastor choose that in his local congregation? What does that look like, especially when, as you mentioned, the stakes can be high, like choosing discomfort and that kind of, raw vulnerability in your local congregation can put yourself at risk, put your family at risk. Like so. How as a pastor do you go about doing that? And then the flip side of that coin is, how can men in the church help create an environment of men connecting and being together where a pastor could actually do that? What does that look like to be able to create a space in your church where a pastor could choose voluntary discomfort instead of having to face it involuntarily at some place down the road?
It's not easy. Um, I think number one, I wouldn't encourage a pastor to be foolish in divulging everything to everyone. Um,
Yeah.
because I think that some of our darkest, deepest struggles, some of the things that were really they're taking their toll on us, I think deserve a very limited, trusted audience. So I think, and it might not be at your church. My hope is that it would, but that you have somebody or a couple of people that you can really dig in and get honest. It is hard because I think what a lot of churchgoers want out of their pastoral leadership these days is accountability. And I found that accountability doesn't really work. You can only create space for somebody to give an account for their actions and what they're doing. And so it only works as far as we're willing to be honest about it.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like for you? And I mean, this goes back to college days for me. I was an RA, and so we had our group there. And I remember one of my good friends at the time. He said, "Matt, you're nothing more than a piece of crap." So thank you. He said, "You might try to cover yourself up, spray some kind of like good fragrance on you so that you don't stink." But he says, "I just want you to know, I give you permission to smell around me." And I thought, I need more friends like this.
Yeah.
We all need friends like that. And so, what does that look like to be able to lean in and say, look, and it doesn't mean, look, if you if you are grossly sinning and you like, maybe the best place for you is not ministry, and you might need a break. You might need to get out and do something else. And so I'm not trying to like keep pastors' jobs at all costs. I think you could forfeit your soul and do some of that, right? So what does that look like? But how do we get honest and how do we get real before some of these things become a problem, right? Before some of these things, when I have these like untended to wounds that if left festered long enough, they start to that bitterness and resentment leads to some more damaging behavior, right? And so um, you got to find some people that you can say, I need to get really honest, and I'm looking for people who can do that. And part of that's a trust building process, right? Like I've got to trust in small doses before I can trust with some bigger things, and so
Yeah.
that process takes time. And then for pastors um, to be able, or for communities to be able to do that, like well, what can we do to be able to create some safety and to be able to say we care about you and we love you and this is what it's going to look like for us to be in relationship with one another. I wish it was an easier answer that like if you do A, B, and C, this is the formula and it's going to work every single time. And I just
Right.
don't think it exists.
Um, okay. Well, then let's talk about on the other side of that. Then, if you're guys, if you're a guy listening and uh, the pastor at your church is dealing with or has dealt with some kind of fallout, scandal, failure, whatever that looks like. Uh, what does um, what does a helpful response look like? Right? You talked about like you get to see the underbelly of kind of the church dark side. In terms of the way that some of these things get handled poorly, how pastors and their families get abused and taken advantage of in these types of situations. Um, what can men do to be able to love their pastors well who have hit some kind of obstacle or hardship or failure that might require hard conversations or even, like we're talking about, a transition?
Yeah, it's for those seasons when the defecation hits the oscillation,
Yeah.
is what we say, right? It's it's rough.
Well put.
What's interesting is when I came out of ministry, uh, one of the things that we had to do, which was really difficult, was we had a school attached to our church, and in order for our kids to continue to attend that school while I was no longer employed at the church that ran that school, we needed to continue to attend the church. Just weeks after a confession letter was read, right? And I'll never forget about 2 months into that process that there was a guy who came up to me in the lobby after church as I was trying to escape and get back to my car. He said, "Pastor," which I wasn't at the time. He said, "Pastor, I don't know what you did, but I'm sure as hell glad that the elders don't know what I've done because they would have kicked me out a long time ago."
Hmm.
And you just realize in that moment that people are watching, and how we treat each other in the midst of hard times either sends people into protection, like this isn't safe, or performance. I can't really be who I want to be or who I am,
Yeah.
because that exposure is going to do me in. What does it look like for us to be able to come alongside people and to be able to say, I'm going to take you where you're at, and I'm gonna walk with you. And sometimes I think when you have a tragedy that strikes, and when there's something that is big or traumatic, sometimes it's the onslaught of everything that happens right at the point of impact, right?
Yeah.
It's the atom bomb that goes off and just kind of clears everything in the way. And so that time in that exact moment might not be the best time because they're unraveling. But that's where you can leave a text. I'm here if and when you need me. But it's not like, waiting 2 weeks and like, well, he never got back to me. It's hitting it again. Hey, I've been in a similar spot. I know what it's like, to feel like you don't have anybody, and if you need somebody, I'm here.
Yeah.
Whatever that, or there were people who just said like, "Hey, I want to cover counseling for you for the next couple months," or "Hey, we have a cabin. I know you guys probably need to get away. Here's what that looks like," right? So how do we come alongside people, and just remain consistent? One of the things we talk about in ministry transitions is, I call it the Uriah effect. Remember David and Bathsheba, and David sends Uriah,
Yeah.
lines him up on the front line with all of his buddies, and they kind of all yell, "Charge! Here we go! Yeah, yeah!" And Uriah finds himself in the DMZ, in no man's land, and as his life is taken from him, he's not only getting pierced by the arrows of the enemy, but I'm sure that there was a moment for him where he realized, I'm all alone out here, and the friendly fire probably killed him even harder, than the enemy's fire. And so we're pretty good in the church, unfortunately, at shooting our wounded and kicking them while they're down. And I in no way tolerate sin, but I have a lot more compassion for people who are sinners. I've visited pastors in prison in the last couple of years, who deserve to be there and needed to be there, but they still contain, they're image bearers, right? And so,
Yeah.
uh, who am I to judge just because my sins might be lesser? Um, I'm guilty, and so I want to come alongside people. I think that that's what we need to see more of. Sure, there's egregious, gross sin. How do we actually come alongside people and say, I'm still going to love you. You have permission to smell. I already know your stench, and I'm going to move towards you anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
we go visit, do prison ministry as it is already. We don't do so well at visiting people on their way in.
Yeah.
We're just gonna we give a lot of distance, and maybe we need to move a little bit closer in time.
Dude, fantastic. Uh, the weight of wisdom that you're offering is solid gold right now. So thank you. I know you've walked a hard road to be able to get to that place to have it to offer. But thank you for offering it to us. And guys, as you're watching or listening, I hope you're taking this in. I hope you're thinking about how you can apply it in your church context. If you're a part of a church, if you're not a part of a church, I hope that you'll find one, or that you'll take this and use it to be able to show some empathy and some compassion and some help to the folks in your life who may be struggling themselves, and to just recognize, like, hey, you're not alone in your struggles. And very often the people that are leading and serving the most are the ones who are struggling the most because they're the most in isolation about it. So what can you do to be able to serve those men who might be in need of that kind of connection, and a place to be able to choose some of that vulnerability that we talked about, to be able to move towards it with a group of men who are safe? How can you create that for others? Matt, thank you for offering what you have today. What can guys do to be able to get connected with you, or if they want to find out about ministry transitions and how it might serve their church, serve their pastor, serve, if they're aware of a situation that might need your help, what can they do to be able to get connected with you?
Yeah, I'm a very accessible human being, so you can find me. Our website's ministrytransitions.com. You can get me at matt@ministrytransitions.com. But yeah, I realized along the way that Christians were really good at saying hello, and we need a little bit of help on how we say goodbye. And so that's really the space. It doesn't have to be a ministry transition, but life is just full of transitions, right? We
Yeah.
see it all over the place. We change and transition presidents every 4 years, and we change jobs, and we change living situations. So we're accustomed to change, and so how we work through those seasons is super important. Um, I'd say there's maybe a couple things. If you go to ministrytransitions.com/downloads, we have several things that you can download. But I'd say maybe for your crew, one that's been profound is we have a document on there called the Kingdom Principle of Transformational Suffering. And one of these, we talk a lot about to suffer in the sufferings of Jesus, but also uh, the next part of that we often leave out is that we're also glorified in His glory. And so, what does it look like to even just see some of those seasons where you're struggling as moments of like God meeting you? The other piece in there is just I call it a field journal for people who are in transition, and we talk about these seasons of the soul, how we move from uh, orientation, which everything's fine, to suddenly we find ourselves in the wilderness of disorientation. And what we want oftentimes in that wilderness season of disorientation is just get me back to where I was.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no going back, and there's only going forward. And that going forward is what we'd call reorientation. And so tracing that journey, if you find yourself like the rug just got pulled out from you in your life and you're trying to figure out what's next, um, and how do I get to a new normal, reorienting my life in the equilibrium that there's or the other way of looking at it is order, disorder, reorder. But how do we do that? So there's just a quick, like it's a 10-page but like very graphic oriented journal and some scriptures that tie into that. And I think those would be some helpful resources along the way. And if you've seen or looking at transition in your company, in your ministries, in your pastors, and they're just struggling, we get to sit and listen. So I'm happy to connect with all of those as well. So
Yeah.
that's it, man.
What?
You're doing a great work, and I think that guys, we need to get together and we need to create some safe places. There is something unique about dudes getting together. I like that you say getting naked. I feel like a lot of college days that was a lot of it, but essentially, what does it look like to drop the fig leaf and just say,
Yeah.
"Here I am." Like
Yep.
this is what it looks like, and to be safe and loved in those spots, despite, is a pretty awesome thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. One more time. What was the website where they can get all those resources?
Ministrytransitions.com/ downloads. And I think it's under like the resources tab. You can grab it there too. But
Perfect. Okay. And we'll include that in the show notes as well. But yeah, guys, if any of that would be helpful, go check it out. Matt, thank you so much, man. This has been a real treat and a fantastic conversation. Really enjoy your company and appreciative of your wisdom and your ministry.
you bet. Thanks, man.